and welcome back to Acro's Good Clinical Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia McLeod. Today, I'm joined by Malaikannan Sankarasubbu, Chief Technology and AI Officer at Saama, and Jonathan Shough, Chief Information Officer at Parexel. They're here today to discuss the transformative impact that the strategic use of AI is having on clinical development. They'll dive deeper into which advancements in generative AI have the potential to improve the clinical trial workflow, the integration of AI and predictive analytics in risk assessment processes, and the importance of strong change management strategies when implementing new AI technologies. We hope you enjoy. All right. Well, thank you so much to Jonathan and Malai for joining me today. You guys are here to tell our audience all about artificial intelligence and machine learning in drug development and some of the trends that you're seeing in the industry today. So I figure we'll just jump right in. And Jonathan, maybe I'll start off with you. How are you seeing AI being used in clinical research today for the benefit of patients?
Oh, Sophia, it's first of all, thanks for allowing us to join today. I'm really excited to have a short conversation about AI and its application in our industry. I think we're really seeing application of just this broad swath of AI, whether it's hyperautomation and related technologies, machine learning, NLP, core AI, Gen AI, in really any way that people can think for how to speed up work that they're doing. And it's so important for us to bring products to patients faster that a lot of the application is really focused there. We're seeing, an increased use of automations throughout the business, whether it's in the lab space, central lab space, whether it's in the operational delivery space. We're also seeing it used in the scientific analysis community, our data managers, even in medical reviewer areas where we're actually seeing the use of AI really breaking down some of the time that it takes to really get at the nugget of patterns that exist in the data that we deal with on a daily basis. And so those things combined with sort of in the field addition and growth of wearable technologies. We have more and more embedded sensors that we see within the wearable devices, whether they're, patient reported, outcomes driven, or they're passive outcomes driven. And that, of course, is ramping up the amount of data that we see come through the platform. And so AI is really giving us a real tool that can actually, remove some of that noise very quickly to get at the signals that are critically important, but also allowing us to use that copious amount of data to start to think about how do we think about digital twins? How do we think about synthetic control arms differently? And what could we actually do in those modes of use that could actually really change, maybe even upline, how do we address preclinical? What do we do? And could we eliminate some of the animal models that are used in the work that we do? And so I think all of those things are really underpinning or driving the growth of AI within the clinical operation, clinical development arena.
And Malai, same question to you. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks for hosting me here, Sophia. Nice talking to you, Jonathan, again. It's a good forum. I've been listening to the other podcasts that Acro has been recording. They're pretty good. Again, I think from when I'm looking at it from an AI in a clinical research perspective, for me, everything is patients first. Why are we doing what we are doing? I think that's the way that I'm going to put this whole thing in, right? Let's say a candidate drug works. They figured out that it works. It has a lot of potential. And when it works, it has to come to the market faster. That's the entire thing. If there is an oncology trial that is running, there is a drug that has a potential to impact someone's life in a very positive way, that has to come to market faster. For me, the way I look at least on the clinical research or clinical development side of things, it's for accelerating clinical trials. That's the fundamental thing that AI is capable of and that it can do. We saw some of that during the COVID vaccine trial, Pfizer COVID vaccine, where we Saama played a key role on it. We were able to help accelerate from 30 days to 22 hours. It's public news. But that's one aspect of it. From what I'm seeing in a clinical research area, right, what happens is we deal with a lot of documents. The reason why this is a prime space for disruption is due to that aspect. I, in fact, wrote an article, I think, in one of the really good publishing forum 5-6 years back, 2019. I said pharma has a big text problem. That was the article, right? And I talked about how if you understand text better, you could make these clinical trials accelerate. That was the theme of the article. And we are seeing some of those being applied in clinical trials right now. When I'm looking at a clinical trial side of things, for me, it is like multiple milestones during a during like a continuum of like from the point where you start a clinical trial to submissions. So for if you have to accelerate a clinical trial, you can't say that like I'm going to build one model to accelerate everything. That's not how it works. You need to have multiple small things what you have to do to accelerate it in a way that it could be accelerated. So you need to have those products or solutions that can go in and impact in those areas. For example, writing a protocol. I mean, Lucas is something very simple, but that's a key thing. There are a lot of people who get involved in it. If you can write a protocol, like it's for me, I do publish a lot of research papers, and when we write a scientifically peer-reviewed research paper, what happens is you go through so much of rigor for you to put that content in. You have to look for citations. Every word what you write matters quite a bit. So that is a very time-consuming process. I actually use some of these to automate my research work as well for publishing papers. So that is what, from a protocol authoring perspective, is very similar in nature. You could use that. And there are cases like CSR. There was a really good article from Novo Nordisk. They came out openly and said, like, we were able to accelerate the CSR generation for obesity trial pretty quickly using Gen AI, right? I think that's another area when you're looking at it. So you can see this in a lot of places, starting from protocol to CSR, data review, or finding insights on that particular data, as Jonathan was mentioning, with signals for patients, signals for clinical trials. Whether you have like a signal that where you should stop a clinical trial faster, it's not only about getting the drug to market faster, it's about, there is a publication that is out there and it talks about it, and we are seeing a similar signal. We need to stop this trial faster. All that could be achieved through AI. So there are a lot of practical application. It's very prime disruptor from that particular space. Having said that, there are also things that we need to worry about. We work in a highly regulated and validated environment. So controlling what these models can do, how you deploy it, the framework around it, that also matters quite a bit. Acro has been amazing leading that side of the conversation. Very happy that those discussions are happening.
Yes, in fact, I would tack on to that very last piece. In fact, we were just talking about some of these, I'll call them framework questions that the FDA has documented in their latest updates. And so Acro has done a really good job of bringing the community around, really doing a much better job of harmonizing some of the queries that exist within that framework so that Acro can actually help us in presenting back to FDA. And I think, we'll see it even from MHRA and others, because, they look at what one another does in actually representing the things that could be important and will be important in how we leverage AI within the industry.
Yep, agreed.
From the Acro side, that group has been it's been a really fun group to watch, the way, everyone's really collaborative with one another. I think that's something people think about all the time, is that you guys are all competitors, but there are so many spaces where we can really collaborate for the betterment of our patients. So it's really been a fun group to work with.
Patients first. I have a 13-year-old son, and when I have to explain it to him what I do and why I do that, that's the way that I explain it to him, right? It's, if you want to just make money, you're probably better off doing something else. But I have very rarely, right? This is how I talk to my team. I talk to a lot of folks. Very rarely you get an opportunity to write a line of code that actually has a positive impact on someone's life, right? And that happens here in the industry that we work on, and we have been very lucky from that standpoint. That's the part that is very critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering too, if we think a little bit about clinical trial workflow and generative AI, and how you both see, obviously, Jonathan, you're at a CRO, and Malai, you're at a tech company. What advancements in those areas are you seeing as sort of most promising today?
So I think it's a great question. One aspect that when I'm looking at it is, there's a lot of grunt work in what we do, from getting a trial to an approval or submission to FDA. A lot of that grunt work, like let's say as a medical reviewer, folks with an MD, PhD, did I sign up to look at an Excel sheet to review data manually? No, the training is very different. Every hour that is saved there would actually be spent on talking to patients or understanding what the patient needs are. So there are areas where AI can actually make a huge impact if it can act as a recommendation engine. I would not call it make the final decision. Act as a recommendation engine, surface it to them in such a way that don't overwhelm them, but surface them in a way that this is the reason why the model thinks that way. Reasoning models are pretty effective nowadays. So that will actually have a huge impact. There are a lot of areas. So that is one, right? When science meets the operations part of it, from writing a protocol, there's a huge impact right there. If you can actually understand what they're asking, and if you have an ability to connect with the feasibility part of it right then and there, you write a better protocol. Sometimes the rigor for writing the protocol is so hard, it's very hard to find patients, people who execute on clinical trials. I think, Jonathan, you'll be able to talk about it. When you have to go for patient recruitment, I think it becomes a big deal, right? You won't be able to find them. Data review, that's the thing, right? Like when you look at it, there are so many scenarios you have to look at data review. It's manually not possible. And the other thing is also trials are getting complicated a lot with the kind of things that what we are seeing. Usual trials, I would say the pre-COVID to post-COVID, what I'm seeing. Pre-COVID, when we started building the data review platform, we partnered with Pfizer to build it. I think it's open knowledge. The first requirement that was given us, the number of patients in a trial does not exceed more than 1,000. Very rarely it goes more than that. The first trial that we took the platform live was for 50,000 subject study, right? And we are seeing that pattern evolving. Like right now with the GLP-1 obesity side of trials, like now more and more patients are getting recruited or part of the clinical trial. It's very hard to manually review and find those issues. So that has to be aided by some of these AI based tools for them to actually come to that outcome what they really want. Risk is another area, right? For everything, protocol is the base. Like that's the design. Like I'm a software guy, so for me that's a design document. What I have to do is ensure that every downstream system is going to follow that particular thing. And if I can have an understanding of protocol, if I can actually set up my data review plan based on that, and set up that entire thing, you can generate the DQ listings, you can generate the listing, exception listing, what you want to see. You can let a model find those issues for you, all that, right? That's where I think there's a lot of impact in this area.
Yeah, I would add similarly that it's interesting. We've digitalized much of the work that we do, right? And it may seem simplistic, but Word, Excel, PowerPoint, right? Clinical trial management systems, ETMF, all these things, all the e-services that exist in the marketplace and that we utilize. We solve the idea that paper wasn't going to work any longer. And so we've digitalized, and I use that term digitalize on purpose because we've not necessarily digitized it all yet. But with the advent of what I would call human interactive AI technology, which is really what's happened here, right? We've been using these related technologies for quite a number of years. We just now have a way to allow more people to interact with them. But we're now at a point where we have that digitalized data that now we can begin to think in more workflow-driven methodology. And through doing that, then add on top of that this incredible horsepower of relationships between data and visuals, right? If you think in our world, we're looking at not just a protocol and a potential patient population. We're also now looking at scans and images. We're now identifying data far more readily inside of those attributed pieces of information. We now are creating this true digitized connector, if you will, upon which AI is able to really operate. And that's now accelerating at a rate that's allowing us to really think differently about how do we actually think about RFI to proposal to protocol agreement and then execute, find sites, find patients, start work, because we can compress that time now, leveraging some of this is hopeful, but and certainly where we're focused, but being able to compress time is a way to better analyze that, therefore the data that comes along as part of the work that we do in everyday operations.
Yeah, Jonathan, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about risk assessment. So, can you tell us a bit more about the impact that you see the integration of AI and predictive analytics in the risk assessment process having on clinical trials?
Again, I think it's actually a fantastic topical question, and I'm actually going to broaden the aperture on risk just a little bit, but it's sort of the core risk when we think about as we build, our work against a protocol to deliver, when we think about those risks that exist that we need to make sure we're keeping an eye on, sort of the first generation AI easily allows us to feel far better about monitoring against that risk position and saying, let's make sure that we've attributed enough of the activities to look at what's happening in PKPD, what's happening in the results of biometrics, what are we seeing in the blood draw and the labs that we're getting, et cetera. So we can signal those things far quickly than ever before. And therefore, the risks that we're managing against actually can be far more, if you will, attenuated than they've ever been. And then to broaden the aperture a little bit, what I would say is, for example, one of the things that we're working on at Parexel as we think about how to accelerate delivery for patients is this idea of the study companion. And our idea is that as we begin to build more and more data of our own internally about work that we do, and we can add on top of that now this generative AI modeling that allows us to really learn from what we've done, as we start to take in activities, whether it's, you're doing a very specific piece of work for an FSP solution, or I'm looking for an RFP on, all of a project to deliver from soup to nuts. We can now use that study companion to actually learn what's come before, what's similar therapeutic area and indications, what are the diagnostic activities that were done, of those, what studies have been approved and how were they approved and what exceptions were made or not made, so that we can use the study companion to actually present to the team based on what we know, what we've learned, what's in the public domain that others have learned. We can now bring all that together in ways that, would take you months before. Now you can do that in a few clicks and a 24-hour period or less, and then start thinking more, leveraging the clinicians, leveraging the medical reviewers, leveraging, the therapeutic leads to actually sit down and say, hey, how do we make this better? And in the end, yeah, that leads to more opportunity, but most importantly is it leads to, again, patients getting the treatments that they need with far more safety and efficacy, and it'll accelerate the time from idea to bottle, and that's really key.
Right. Totally, totally. And Malai, this kind of makes me think of Saama and the OpenBio LLM and, this whole idea of acceleration. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how OpenBio can help accelerate trials and maybe create some new possibilities as we think about personalized medicine.
Yeah, maybe I want to go back to that risk-based thing.
Yeah, please.
I think Jonathan touched on some of the very key aspects, right? The holistic view. I think that is the key, right? When he used the term, he's going to broaden the aperture. My eyes started lighting up on that perspective. So the key is it's holistic in nature. Like now, there are tools that were available before, which was finding risk, but it was overwhelming folks who are managing these risks. I think that is the key. You can put visuals on top. You can do a two-dimensional analysis and and try to bring some statistical algorithm, which is all needed. I'm not saying it's not needed, but there are reasoning models that are out there right now that does a far better job in explaining it. It's multimodal in nature. It looks at visuals. It looks at all these aspects and starts bringing in and explaining why it thinks that way. One approach that what we use is we use something called a decision by jury. We don't trust one model to give us a result what we really want, right? We make models compete against each other. I'm a big fan of Law and Order, right? I literally got inspired from that thing for us to do this. And when you make these things compete against each other to come up with that more accurate result for physicians to look at it, or somebody who manages risk to look at it. Otherwise, there's always this thing where it was like it was before, it was always in the risk that some other system has found, but there are 10,000 other false positives that are there. When you make a model to explain or different model to explain or like reflect on why that particular thing is not right, it becomes a whole lot better for us to manage these risks. I think that is a key area from the risk management perspective. It's about getting the drug to market faster or impacting the patient lives faster, as Jonathan was saying. I think what that's the very it's just like moving at such a rapid pace. Probably what we're talking now, when this podcast gets released in a month from now, probably we'll have something else which is already there in the market. That's the pace what we're talking about.
And to just double tap on that, Malai. So purely coincidentally, I can't not say this. Just last night, I thought I'm going to go back and watch the first season, first show of Law and Order. I did. I watched the first season, first show, coincidentally. But, maybe one last topic on the or point on the risk and risk management and compliance. The other thing that we're seeing happen is because we're able to apply some of these tools sort of actively at engagement, what we're finding is issues that would have shown up as a quality event or a quality issue, or a deviation, fill in the blank. There's so many things, as we all know, that can occur. They're flagged sooner, right? Now they're flagged before they actually become the level, to the level of a real risk, because we're able to now see with far greater detail because of the tools. You see those things quickly now, where before you may not see some of these issues show up until 3 or 4 weeks down the road, and only 2 or 3 weeks before you're going to do an interim analysis. So now we can attenuate these to be far more indicative sooner. And to Malai's point earlier, that means we can also kill things sooner if we need to.
Yep. So back to that question that you asked, Sophia, on the open bio-LLM, right? The one thing that we are very proud about is our open source contribution. The world is not what we see as just the cloud, and everything what we're seeing is due to that simple fact that Linus Torvald decided to open source Linux. I think that has changed the way how we do compute, how we do things, a lot of that. So we have that built into our ethos. We contribute to some of these deep learning frameworks. If you look at it, TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, Pandas, for that matter, we contribute heavily to that code as well as donations and whatnot and stuff. We do quite a bit of activity on that side of things. So as I said, since our ethos is built on that, a little bit of a journey. The Open BioLM, the point that when we released it May last year, I think, about this time, that's when we released it, exactly a year back. It's been like a long journey for us to hit that. We are crazy enough to actually go train our own large language models from scratch, at 10 billion and the 30 billion parameter. This was in early 2023, before even ChatGPT, before or right at the time when ChatGPT came out. But we have been in the process of doing things for quite some time. But what we saw was, after when we were monitoring all these models that were coming out, is the models which were trained with a lot of data and a lot of the compute, when it's a lot bigger, it tends to perform reason a lot better. So we want to leverage the reasoning part of the model, but at the same time, bring the pharma perspective into those generic models that are available. So that's the part that what we did is we took that on us to do it, since we collected data and we tagged curated data with expert reviews and stuff. We open source some parts of it as well, called MedMCQA. It's a highly cited paper, has more than 500 citations just for that particular paper. So what we did is we ended up training a model. We trained a larger model, but the model that we open source is called Open BioLLM. We saw the potential for that particular thing to be a lot bigger than what we could do just at Saama alone. So we wanted to give it away. So that was the part what we ended up doing. The model beat GPT-4 by nearly 4% when we released it last year. So that was a big deal, right? But why did we go about fine-tuning our own model? I think that is the bigger question that we have, right? So what is happening is, in this case, is a lot of folks use API-based calls, like, it's a either call OpenAI or Azure OpenAI or Anthropic or Claude, Grok. There are different options. You can call an API and get certain things done. There are some cases where it works really well. But when you have to process a lot of data through a model, right? Some of the scenarios where we talked about a data review, right? I have to run through so much. I need to identify risk. I need to run the entire clinical data that is collected through a model. When you call an API, they charge by tokens. When they charge by tokens, the tokenization itself is very tricky. It's not associated with the word. It could be three-fourths of a word, or it could be even one character in a word as a token. So when that happens, the amount of money what you pay for an API-based approach, or that could be like a lot. When we did some benchmark around it, this was about a year back for GPT 3.5 or 4 for a clinical trial with 1,000 subject study. If you have to run it for a period of about a year to clean data or review data, whatever, right? It will cost us somewhere around $3 million if you have to run it through the cycle. That's a lot of money. Okay, so as much as we talk about patients, there is also an element of cost that comes into picture, which makes it it's not affordable for everyone for them to go about doing that. There are some studies then they will use, and the usage is not cannot be done for every study, everything that we're going after. So we want to democratize that aspect of it. So there are cases where you can use an API based approach, but there are cases where there's heavy data volume processing that is really required for a model to work based on instructions and surface the results and stuff. You need to have a fine tuned approach. So the OpenBioLM internally, like we open sourced a version of it, but what we have trained and operationalized is another version of a large language model, which is based on OpenBioLM but trained on a lot more data. We operationalized it. So what that means is you only pay for the compute when we operationalize, right? At least internally, we don't need to worry about the API calls for most parts. And that gives us the flexibility for us to actually put it for a lot more use cases. Obviously, this is not for everyone, right? Would I suggest or recommend this for everyone? No, this is at a different league altogether. But if we want to get that data, or if you want to get that output, what we really want to go about it, you want to have your own fine-tuned model to do it. And this also gives a different perspective when it comes to agents, right? That we are in the agentic workflow time right now. Like there are a lot of agents being talked about and stuff. But if you have to operationalize these agents also consume tons of tokens. You have to have a tokens for planning. You need to worry about tokens during your execution. You need to worry about tokens during evaluation. You need to worry about tokens during reflection. So if you put all these things together, for you to even write a simple agent and put it in production, it's going to be extremely expensive. So there is a vision, and when rubber meets the road, it's just a very different conversation altogether. So even for those scenarios, you need to have your own fine-tuned model if you want to get the cost benefits out of it, right? There are places, some other place where you could really spend that money, right? Getting a doctor to go talk to the patient. There are other areas where we could really fund, but is this the place where we want to do by calling the API? No. Okay, so that's the overarching thing, right? From that standpoint. There was one another aspect that we thought about when we are trying to put these models, right? Fine-tuned version, OpenBioLM, one aspect of it. So the other aspect is controlling the output as well. Like the problem with using an API is, let's say when we train these models, what happens is sometimes we train with floating point 16 or 32. So which means, right, is number of zeros after a period. So if it is like 0.6677778889, and if it goes that way, but let's say I want to approximate it to 2 digits right after that period. So if I could roll it down to 0.69, which means I'm losing the precision. So models are trained with the longer, and when they operationalize, sometimes what happens depending on the load and everything, we approximate to do that, which means it takes lesser compute for us to operationalize these models. But you never know when you use an API-based approach, what model was put in and what model are you really using. So the results may decay. It may be the same 3.5 or 3.7 or 3.9 version, they're calling it out, but the quantized version is going to be very different from the actual version what you use. So you need to have a stronger eval framework if that is the case, which makes it even more tricky when it comes to a probabilistic system. At what point do you say that this has drifted? So to have all that control, right, we need to have our own fine-tuned version of model, at least for the larger use case, more critical use case, to control it from a validation standpoint. That's another angle why we went towards that. Very long-winded explanation for your question, Sophia, but I just wanted to put it out. So.
No, that was great. I was wondering if you wanted to talk at all about, you mentioned open source and how important that is. And, if we just wanted to expand a little bit on some of the benefits of open source AI models for, the broader research enterprise.
It again, it boils down to the aspect, right? Like it's very so. I think so I was talking to someone in pharma who's senior. They said like they have more pilots than Lufthansa does. Obviously, it's a European company, and they said like it's very easy to do a pilot when it comes to some of these Gen AI related stuff, but it's very hard to operationalize this. Okay. So when rubber meets the road, like for a small use case, you could do a pilot with an API-based stuff, but when it actually comes to operationalizing some of these for a larger volume things and stuff, that is where the difference would come. The value conversation will start coming in. Purely from that angle, it's better to have your own model or at least operationalize some of these models that's open source or fine tune your own model from an operationalization standpoint. If it is not your bread and butter, there are folks who are available in the market who could help do that, right? But again, it needs a different kind of setup, different kind of thought process. Some folks want to just worry about the outcomes, which is great. But to generate that outcome, you need to go through some steps for you to achieve that. I think that is where, companies like us, Saama, or even Jonathan's Parexel, they all come in.
Awesome. Well, I want to get to our last question for everyone. And so maybe Malai, I'll throw it to you first, and then Jonathan, I'll have you
Yep.
put a nice bow on everything for us. But, some people I think are still a little bit nervous about AI and they're thinking about challenges and a ton of different things. And so I want to make sure we're letting everyone know that we are aware of all of those things and we're working, I think with that in mind. But I'm wondering from both of you, if we think about pitfalls that we want to make sure we're avoiding as we're utilizing AI more frequently, increasingly so in the clinical trials industry, what do you really want to highlight for folks and let them know that, you are aware of this and cognizant of it as you're developing your models and, working to avoid that in your work?
I think the model alone is not going to give you the output what you really want, Sophia. It has to be merged with the workflow that is there, or the changes that has to be done to a workflow to accommodate that. That's the way I look at it. You could have a very sophisticated model, but you have not wired it the right way, with the right framework, with the right feedback in place. I think it's going to be very hard. The one aspect that is often ignored is change management when you introduce some tools like this. It may look as if it's very vanilla from that standpoint, but when you introduce a tool, right, a cousin of mine is a pediatric cardiologist, and keeps saying, you guys from tech always introduce new tools, and it has never decreased my work; it has always increased my work. When are you going to figure that part out? So it's more about change management. When I dug deep into that problem, it's more about change management with them. So we have to spend time to educate the folks who are end users to spend some time to explain what these models are going to do, how the existing process is going to change, what kind of updates are needed to the SOP. You have to do this at the initial phase rather than doing all your manual process and then AI coming in to do that. So how are you going to change your process to accommodate it? The change management aspect plays a key role. The third thing that I'm going to say on this is whenever we build these things, we have to always take into consideration that we are dealing with patients. Okay, it's patient life first. So from that angle, treat this as a recommendation system. You have to bring feedback to the user for them to act on it. You can give them tools when they can approve bulk or they can reject something, and you need to monitor the drift and other things for you to train these things back on. But the human in the loop is actually a major aspect that comes in when it comes to these things. If you take care of these parts, along with working with the regulators on it, it's easier to go early to talk to them rather than being late in the game on some of these. So those matters quite a bit. Like FDA has been pretty good. I think we refer to the ACRO conversation that we are trying to have with FDA as well to present. They've been so open about it. They're putting those guidance out for us to actually reach out and talk. So engaging with them also matters quite a bit when it comes to using AI in the clinical research. It's like a seminal moment, right? I remember, I'm not sure how old Jonathan is, so I'm not going to want to ask for your age, Jonathan, but when I graduated out of college, I remember that's when Google just started coming up really well. Before that, when I had to look for something, there are other search engines, but you literally have to read a book to find all the information. Google changed the perspective on we use internet, we do our day-to-day work and stuff. That is what I'm seeing as a seminal moment now that arrived in 2022. When I ask my 13-year-old son how he's actually looking for information, he does not use Google that much. He's either going to Perplexity or ChatGPT for that matter to get that answer. So we are at that seminal moment. So we have to embrace it, but we have to embrace within that framework to make sure that it's patient's life first. I think that's the way I'm going to put it, Sophia.
I would agree, and I'll try to add some things in addition to those in terms of sort of pitfalls and avoiding. One, I think it's important to establish sort of the rules of the road and your strategy and the guardrails. And one of the taglines that we have, for example, at Parexel, because we are always thinking about patient first, is just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And I think this ethical boundary is an ever increasing one that we have to think about and address, first of all. Second, I think we also have to do a far better job if we're not careful, meaning we know we can do these things. We need to make sure and also ensure that there's a way to realize the benefits that we're ascribing to the solutions that we're developing and that we're delivering or that we're consuming from our partners. It's critically important that we show those benefits, or what we call internally realization. And I think we also need to make sure, and you did mention this, Malai, but I'm going to double tap on it. You cannot underestimate the difficulty of change management, and I'm adding training also on that change management and stopping the old. Our industry, it just is a fact, is really poor, particularly at the very last thing, stopping the old. And so teaching people new ways, making sure they can interact with the products in a way that makes sense for them, driving solid change management, and then turn off the stuff you used to do. Just put it behind us and move forward. I think those are pitfalls that we see people falling into now, and we've seen a couple where we've done things and all of a sudden we realize we didn't do one of the 3 steps we needed to do to make it successful. And so I think doing what we can to recognize the human impact and focusing on the positive impact that it has for the humans in the loop, and importantly, as we drive with heart, as long as we're thinking about those pitfalls proactively and we're engaging them with a framework and guardrails that everybody agrees, I think we'll see acceleration occur. We'll see quality, reduced risk. We'll see better outcomes. I think it's a seminal time in our history in this industry. I've been doing this since early 2000, and I think this could actually have us start changing the questions we ask, where we haven't really done that for the 26 or so years that many of us have been doing this. And so I think these pitfalls and avoiding them are very important so that we can squeeze every bit of the positive out of this as practical.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's a perfect place to end. I think kind of still looking to the future, but learning from where we've come. So thank you both so much for joining me. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week for another episode of Acro's Good Clinical Podcast.